Hello everyone, DeXe here from DeXe DAO. We have Bryan Petes here with us. Bryan, can you hear us?
GM, I can hear you.
Awesome. All right, so we're going to talk, of course, about DAOs today, as we always do. We had some interesting topics planned out ahead, but going to keep it flowing kind of freely, seeing where it goes, just talking about what works, what doesn't work, what could work, and just anything comes to mind as far as DAOs go. Let's start with Bryan introducing himself, and then we'll take it from there.
Hey, yeah, no, thanks for having me here. And yeah, I'm excited to see where the conversation goes. And I love a good organic conversation. Yeah, I go by B Petes or Bryan Peters, and I've been sort of someone who started off my career in tech, and a part of the classic sort of Silicon Valley funded model of scale ups. And I was attracted because of sort of the innovation of startups and sort of the promise of these flat, agile organizations. In the early days of these groups that I was participating in, and I wore a lot of different hats, and I loved that. I loved the ability to kind of like play different roles and move around as things, shifted. But as things grew, I found, it kind of eroded away, and it started to look a lot more like some of the early portions of my career where I was playing in sort of large enterprise organizations. Sort of the innovation, and most importantly for me, the fun. Fun is a killer indicator of what's happening. Kind of got sucked out of everything. This is kind of since these moments of realizing that as things scaled up, they started to suck. The traditional managerial hierarchies get marched in, and the incentives start to become distorted relative to what we're saying our values are and our purpose and our mission is, and what we actually do in the day to day, and how we behave and how we treat one another. There was just something so wrong to have so many smart, wonderful people in the same space, doing these terrible things to one another and with one another. And I've been quite passionate about it since. It's what led me to the crypto space. And within the last few years, building DAO tooling and participating in many DAOs since the boom of DAOs in 2021. But yeah, I entered into the space in 2017 on the promise of DAOs. So I was brought here, although I'd heard of cryptocurrencies and had followed along the Bitcoin white paper story, etc. It was reading on the Ethereum.org site some early smart contract code, proposing how DAO governance could be done, and I've just been all in ever since, with the promise of a better way to coordinate, a better way to participate at scale. And so yeah, that's who I am and what I'm passionate about.
Right, and I agree with a lot of those things. The fun is such a fundamental part, not just for personal enjoyment, but I think for organizations, DAOs, and otherwise in crypto to work well, right? Because as soon as people stop having fun and are super focused on their own profit or some sort of internal squabbles or anything like that, then it just kind of kills everything. So, kind of with that in mind, I want to ask the big question from everything you just said. How do you feel, where are we at now in terms of fun, in terms of decentralized governance, in terms of DAOs specifically? Obviously, there's ups and downs in bull bear markets. In the building, there's ebbs and flows, but more or less 2000, what are we in, 23? Middle of 2023, where are we at? Are we having fun? Are we building well? What do you think?
I mean, yeah, I'm having fun. The market does go up and down, and I think though, if you were to look at like a global fund meter or like a fund meter for the crypto space, it's lower right now, and that's logical. I mean, when fun has a tendency to be more natural and higher under conditions where there's a perception of abundance. It doesn't even actually have to be abundant, like in an extrinsic way. If you just feel like there's abundance present, groups of people like DAOs and just this space in general, they get creative. They start to have a lot of fun. They start to do things that are what I would consider positive speculation, because, speculation is rampant in an abundant market. And, that positive speculation is like sort of, where the intersection of innovation, productive innovation and fun live. And so I feel as though that, if you were to have like a tracker on that, it's gone lower, and the market conditions always drive it lower, as someone who participated in the last bear cycle. But that being said, there's still pockets of fun that exist. And, there are those who in the space have been able to maintain sort of an intrinsic sense of abundance, which has nothing to do with the market cycles and speculative, stuff that occurs in terms of capital, which really, helps enhance that sensation of abundance. And I think, where those pockets exist of people who are acting like that, there's still a lot of fun to be had. And honestly, the bears can be a lot of fun for purposes of taking the ideas and the lessons and, sort of a retrospective, which maybe isn't always, fun if done well, where you have a sober look at what worked and didn't work last cycle. But you can have a lot of fun when you start to realize the opportunities that exist with the new experiential wisdom you have. And I think, those are the types of people I've enjoyed hanging out with, and where I still find pockets of fun in the current cycle.
Yeah, I like those pockets of fun. It feels like when there's a bull cycle, there's this huge euphoria that, obviously is a lot of fun. But it's at times or often even overshadows the actual things that are making crypto fun in the first place, the actual building and the actual discovery that you mentioned. So it feels like even if it's smaller pockets now, they're more authentic, if you will, something like that. You mentioned cycles, obviously, and I talk about cycles too. Let's kind of zero in on the DAOs. Obviously, DAOs go in cycles as well, right? There's a wave of DAOs and there's a bit of a pullback. I'm watching stats every week, and the treasures, the membership, the active members, they all go up, they all go down. It really, sometimes in the market, sometimes it's more longer term. But what do you feel about the waves of the DAOs? The most recent wave, for example. How was it? What was it good at? What was it not so good at? What it succeeded? What it failed at? Let's kind of talk about the past and then maybe the present and the future a little bit too.
Yeah, I mean, as somebody who's been sort of waiting for DAOs to kind of have a moment for a number of years now, this last cycle, particularly the spring of 2021, as on the back of some of the DeFi DAOs taking shape in 2020, a more expanded view of DAOs started to emerge. And so, when things like Gitcoin, Friends with Benefits, Bankless DAO, Forefront, etc., like there were a lot of DAOs that started to take a form of like social, media, type forms and formats. That was really exciting for me. I feel as though DAOs like really started to have a moment, or at least showed their sort of diverse capabilities. And I think there's some interesting things that kind of led to that, right? Because like, previously DAOs were more like a thought exercise, and something that was aggressively attempted and ambitiously attempted, and then got hacked, the famous DAO hack. And, I think Amin, of Moloch DAO, really sort of captured this nicely as PTS DAO. After that hack, and after the experience that was had as an ecosystem relative to that, DAO, lost its luster, and there was a lot of fear and uncertainty around DAOs that led into the last bear cycle of around 2018. And so I saw the Moloch contract as sort of an interesting way to get out of that. And some of the early experiments, with this super, super simplistic approach to, just governing how we bring funds together, and this simple mechanic of a rage quit, where if we're not feeling comfortable and confident, in how things are going, we can just quit. And that the contract was really simple, easy to audit, so we could get over our PS DAO as far as hacks are concerned. And some of the first DAOs that were happening during the last bear cycle laid the seeds for what happened, in the 2021, 2022 cycle of DAOs. And so we got over our fear because of, I think, movements like that. And so I had like the Moloch DAO, they gave us a chance to go for it as the DeFi cycle kicked up in 2020. And so when I look at this last cycle, there's something about us getting over our fears and getting back into that place of, sort of fun and experimenting again. And so, Moloch did that. And because that happened and because investment DAOs started to become a bit of a thing, leading into this last cycle, DAOs started investing in protocols, started investing a lot of DAO tooling, started investing, in DeFi stuff. And, we had the investment DAOs leading the way, and we started to get creative and innovative and, do some, crazy things. And the fun stories started to emerge of like, let's buy a X, buy a blimp, buy a constitution, we started to realize the power of being able to play together and what multiplayer mode is unlocked with DAOs. And we started to kind of play with the edges of it again. And so this last cycle saw everything from, trying to be really pragmatic and controlled and simple to spark it. And then like a cycle does, we started to become completely uncontrolled and experimenting with what was possible and at the limits of what technologically was there to help us. So yeah, that's sort of how I see this last cycle. At least, the front edges and the upswing of it. But I'll pause there, because otherwise I'll just ramble on about like what happened on the other side of that curve.
Yeah, I mean, we should talk about that as well. But yeah, already from what you said now, there's a few sort of case studies that I think are interesting to dive into even more. So, for example, like friends or even pull together, right? That's investing together. It makes sense. It's easy. But let's say we have Gitcoin, we have what's the other one that gave us, right? That survive largely because of grants and they fund a lot of the ecosystem. What's the long-term plan for them? Are they gonna just always rely on grants? Are there bigger revenue streams that they're working on or should be working on? What's the big story there? And well, I'll save the other question for later because I don't want to talk about it too much. But like I love public good DAOs and public good companies in general. And to me, Gitcoin, Giveth, and the like are some of the biggest heroes. But I'm curious, how can such DAOs can make themselves sustainable and self-funding, obviously, and to survive and thrive for a long time throughout these cycles? Do you have any ideas on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's fun because I think that question also kind of relates to the what happened on the other side of that that market curve, which is that we were doing a lot of amazing things, and I love what you're highlighting with public goods funding and Gitcoin and Giveth, etc. And we're driving a lot of great stuff, but I think my experiences come from sitting inside of Bankless DAO, and it's the area that I think of the most when I think of this question around sustainability, because effectively, to be resilient, the things we're doing should be resilient to market cycles and downturns. And so what's happened is I think this market downturn has just exposed sort of the lack of resiliency in a number of the things that we were doing. And I think we had a lot of great ideas and we were executing on those. And in a space of abundance, we didn't have to worry about our ability to sustain them when the market sucked some of the energy out. And I think it's kind of what we learned, or at least I feel I learned, was just how hard it is within a sort of frothy, experimental crowd to change your orientation, as you're going towards asking questions about sustainability and being able to meaningfully activate those. And so I watched, DAOs kind of get on this track of innovation, exploration, and expansion of deploying capital or expansion of issuance in the name of exploring. And so a lot of projects and a lot of things were going on. And what DAOs struggled to do, because they were afraid of killing the vibes and they hadn't thought of it up front, is how to make tough decisions around what's working and what's not working, and what is looking like a sustainable behavior or investment and what isn't. And like also challenging questions around when you're running a ton of different experiments, starting to have dialogue in a large crowd type of format around what is our business model, what are our unit economics. I mean, these are the types of things that, there are things about the sort of the incumbent system, the incumbent model that absolutely suck, which is like, that's all they want to talk about. And they have gotten really, really good at optimizing that. And they often centralize control to like make it easier to quickly decide that, get it in place and move forward. And DAOs kind of like have struggled because all the things they were great at, this was an area that they haven't yet found strength in, I think. And so when I was at Bankless, I observed sort of these challenges because people would bring forward, sort of early warning signals about token issuance or tokenomics and, sustainability and revenue streams. And we were having these conversations as far back as season 1 in 2021. But it was hard for those conversations to have momentum and not sort of kill vibes. Groups would try to form around these types of topics, like the governance solutions engineers and the tokenomics folks led out by iSchool in the case of this Bankless DAO as case study. But it is often challenging to fight the momentum of what was established in the early seasons as the behavioral patterns and the structure and the governance and token management at the DAO. And so I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned about how to think about some of these things up front and not have them have the sort of like ick or disgust reaction that we have around those types of things. In past, we were like, oh, that's of the old system. And I think there's a moment to integrate some of the knowledge of what we have learned previously through sort of the other models of operating prior to DAOs, and like thoughtfully incorporate them in and be careful about our own bias that exists in terms of like, we have a disgust reaction to some things because we have observed disgusting things, but there is wisdom to be incorporated. And I hope that in this next cycle, conversations around sustainability, business models, unit economics, governance, token issuance, how dispute resolution, how to make decisions, tough decisions like cutting spending in areas is something we did not have muscle developed around this as DAOs. And I'd love to see those types of patterns reinforced in this next cycle.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned the word optimizing, because the one I wanted to really zero in is the Optimism Collective, right? Because they do have a revenue model, obviously, right? A very real one and working one, but also have a very clearly stated social mission. And, some can say that it's just dressing for their business model to make them stand out from Arbitrum and others. And others say it really is the core mission. I tend to believe the latter, and at least hope that it's going to be that way. And I could see that kind of model where they're getting their fees from the AMM, from the L2, and that can sustain all of their social initiatives, or at least give it enough fuel to have a treasury for it. But is that the only way? Can Gitcoin and find a source of revenue, by some sort of collaboration with something or offering some sort of service? Can other sustainability-minded DAOs, whether environmental or straight up social or governance-based in terms of government politics type stuff, education-based, obviously talking about Bankless here, can they find some sort of sustained revenue model? Or is it okay maybe to say, what, we don't need to mix business with public good. Maybe we could just develop a really good funding model, really compelling case for donations from individuals, retail investors and funds and governments, etc. And that could be the path forward. I know that it's conversations that are going to be happening throughout the next cycle, but while we're here, it's kind of interesting to have them now a little bit and see how close we were, 2 or 3 years down the line.
Yeah, I think listening to some of your reflections, one of the biggest challenges, I think, in addition to, it being hard under these new structures of, communicating, collaborating, and governing, where we're trying to figure things out. The other is that there's new models, there's new architectures and stacks that exist now, and I feel as though we're just at the front edge of experimenting with like how to produce sustainable business models, and what are the categories and what are the types. And we're still analogizing to like legacy stuff, like, this is a take rate, this is a subscription, this is a tax, this is a not-for-profit, like, and that's fine, right? We're gonna need to incorporate those thoughts and those patterns, and they will be relevant. But like, I'm looking at how we're trying to figure out how to produce a sustainable sort of means of capturing energy, and still debating how it's going to play out. I understand this from the perspective of being a DAO tooling founder, and looking at this DAO tooling landscape in this last cycle, and on the back of the speculative capital, and the fact that we were all kind of not sure where things get monetized and how to do that, when you're living in a modular sort of like composable open landscape. You can't run the old playbook of, we're just going to build this big centralized platform, and it's going to be an app marketplace, and everybody in the marketplace will be able to sort of take their share, and then the major platform that's providing this, that is creating the walled garden, but creating a channel to market for everyone, gets their big take rate, a la Apple, or in the corporate space, major players like Salesforce, etc. And so, and they run like a subscription model. The big innovation coming out of the cycle prior to crypto in Silicon Valley is software as a service, and you're running that model. And I think we're still trying to figure out what we're doing and how it kind of plays nice together. And we've been debating this as far back as when I joined, and probably further back, with like conversations like the FAT protocol thesis. Like, is it the protocol layer that's going to take all the fees, and then they need to, like you said, with optimism, to be a healthy and productive protocol layer and a good steward for innovation, you need to find a means of giving that back, like the public goods funding model of the L2, like optimism, is what they're experimenting with. This is new, this is different, and it's interesting and it's exciting. Whereas Gitcoin, right, they explored that way back. There was an EIP to take some of the fees from the Ethereum L1 and distribute them through a protocol like Gitcoin. And this was prior to Gitcoin having a DAO and decentralizing. And like, some of the debate around that EIP was that it was too centralized. And, there was also debate around whether you should be taking, fees from what could be applied to the security budget, and, enhancing the cost of the L1 in the name of, a mechanism for redistributing, and how good is that mechanism for redistributing, et cetera. And so, that's just the public, goods funding side of things. There's also should we have subscriptions? But like I said, as a DAO tooling provider, I've been looking at this and going, we're all just staring at each other, trying to figure out where it's going to monetize, how we're supposed to collaborate with one another. We all have this ethos of wanting this, composable future where it isn't a winner takes all, and yet we aren't monetizing at all. We're all ending up in this, like, charging nothing or next to nothing, and hoping, that something, a solution emerges. And like, is it going to be at the app layer, or is it going to be at the protocol layer? Is it going to be subscriptions at app, or is it going to be take rate at the protocol layer? And like, yeah, in a traditional paradigm, often in the winner takes all paradigm, somebody starts to figure that out, creates value capture, and then in order for things to expand, they start to redistribute that. But unfortunately, in the old paradigm, that just meant consolidation. There was merger and acquisition. And I do think we need to figure out in this next cycle what merger and acquisition, looks like in a Web3 way. Like, it's probably not merger and acquisition into like a centralized entity, but like, what does spin into DAO maybe look like, so that, we can create vessels of shared capital and collaboration for things that are meaningful and interesting and further the ecosystem, but don't necessarily have their own sustainable, business model, on their own. And that's effectively what was happening in Silicon Valley. The M&A was taking innovative things that were meaningful and useful and added value to end users, and like enhance the network effects of the platform. and they were just buying them. And, those founders were exiting, and, everyone was receiving, a happy smile as far as, the rewards were concerned. But like in that was a path to sustainability. Unfortunately, it was a path to these centralized platforms and the level of control they have. So how the hell are we going to do that? I think is a major question going into this next cycle. Not just how do we get sustainable, but how do we define these new patterns of value capture and value distribution without fucking up what we believe in along the way.
That's right. So that's very interesting because, the M&A activity is happening in crypto as well, right? Old habits die hard, and there's a lot of companies, especially the ones that are a bit more centralized, where bigger one acquires a smaller one to get their capacity, etc. But what would the crypto version, the DeFi version, the DAO version, Web3, whatever you want to call it, look like? For example, just thinking about it now from everything you're saying, maybe instead of, a massive megacorp like, I don't know, Nestle or Amazon or whatever, it's going to be some sort of confederation of different projects and different DAOs that join some sort of a loose union or some sort of I'm thinking sci-fi terms here, right? When you talk about Star Wars universe or some other universes where they come into one federation or confederation, whatever it is, but with each project retaining its own autonomy and maybe even connecting just with smart contracts or some other way that avoids centralization while still giving them collective power as in like a winning unified system, still decentralized, still autonomous, obviously. And in that way, also I'm thinking, okay, so if Web2 gave us, Silicon Valley gave us software as a service, what could we be coming to now in Web3 in the DAO world? Could it be governance as a service? Maybe something like that? I don't know. I mean, this is a very open-ended question. Like, what do you think? Where are we going with this? Is there governance as a service coming? How are the different DAOs and projects going to come together to use collective power and kind of create a clear winner, if there ever is going to be one, without losing their decentralized and autonomous status? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, the truth is I just like, I don't know, but I actually love that and not surprised that as you're thinking about this question, you're immediately like referring to science fiction. And I actually think that like we have a stronger probability of finding the answers to this in fictional works or in games and how we played games. As those ecosystems have evolved of content and gaming, and we're less likely to find it in the incumbent business models. And so, yeah, like look for inspiration and ideas in gaming and the evolution of gaming over the years, and look to it in fictional works that we've read. I think they have a higher probability of shining a light on a potential path. I do think there are some select patterns that exist in sort of traditional commerce today. One example would be the company Hire, and their methodology is called Rendenhei, and they effectively have this kind of like somewhat federated model, where there's these autonomous teams, and there's protocols on how the teams can form capital, and it's kind of like, it's not really an enterprise company. It's a little more like a model of all these different teams forming and like, forming agreements and with one another on how they're going to collaborate to like combine their services to go to market, or incubate new things and fund them, or create contracts amongst each other, to trade, for work, and services. And so I think there's some stuff out there. It's at the fringes, and it too could be incorporated, but I think there's a higher probability that fictional works and games and content and stories of that nature have a better shot at helping us understand what's possible.
Yeah, I can see all worlds coming together in crypto, from Ready Player One to Star Wars, Star Trek, and all kinds of sci-fi that we all love, and you never know, right? But in the more immediate term, what governance structures do you see emerging? What promise do you see in them? Anything that kind of sticks out to you?
Yeah, so I think I'm quite excited by those who are experimenting with looking at governance in a more holistic way. So I'd argue one of the shortcomings, one of the greatest gifts of this last cycle was that we started to discover DAOs and governance and token-based governance patterns. And, as I'd mentioned earlier, but one of the things where we fell short is we established it when we were establishing the DAO, and I call this root governance, because I think of it like a tree. And so as the DAO forms, its root structure takes shape, and the root governance mechanic is present. That's often, drop the token, or buy some NFTs, or and you got to that's our governance token. And whether you're using some sort of hybrid model for simplicity and participation reasons, like, the snapshot gnosis combo where you're, off chain and then on chain ratified, or if you're, the full on chain solutions like Moloch and the Open Zeppelin contracts. And so I think that root DAO governance was well established. And what I'm excited about in terms of the governance space is those who are recognizing that after that root DAO governance took form and capital formation was happening, or energy formation, because maybe it was speculative energy, and it was in the form of the people who were arriving, and we were taking like a bootstrapped approach, like let's build stuff and like distribute tokens to one another so we can govern whatever we build. Inevitably, the DAO starts to kind of expand its structure. Typically, if it's going to be taking on some complicated things, it starts to create grants and funding. It starts to decentralize itself. It starts to, produce autonomous teams, whether they're within the DAO or whether they're, doing RFPs and funding stuff external to the DAO. They're autonomous teams that are moving the purpose of the DAO's mission forward. When this structure starts to take form, I'd say well over 95 to 98% of DAOs stopped caring about on-chain governance. It was too costly. It was too challenging to sort of manage. There wasn't, appropriate tooling. There wasn't appropriate patterns to replicate. Like, everybody was just like forking, the Compound and Governor Bravo type, stuff, or just using the Moloch DAO contract, out of the box with services like DAO House. It made it easy to use these things. But they were also costly, right? Because L2s weren't fully, established and doing their thing at good price points. And so most of the DAO's operations, once this structure was spawned and these autonomous teams existed, was off-chain. And so I'm actually really excited about folks who are starting to recognize the flaws and the attack vectors that existed, and the messiness and the centralization vectors that occurred as DAOs became fully operational and spawned these structures. And some of the problems that I was mentioning earlier that, affected sustainability came from sort of a lack of clarified decision-making and, and uncapturable decision-making. As the DAO's governance went from the root DAO governance mechanic into this other thing, a lot of times this was completely off-chain. There was just, people taking on roles, and they were given roles in Discord servers to do stuff, and then they'd make decisions, and then, maybe if we were lucky, it was, effective, but more often than not, over time, it trended to something that was disorganized or captured, through some form of, centralization, politicking, power dynamics, nefarious attacks to try and, grab treasury through these operational vulnerabilities. And I love the idea of starting to think about, no, how do we get this, on chain too, in a cost-effective and user-friendly way? How do we start to harden the governance at all layers of the DAO? How do we start governing who's in these roles? How do we start determining what governance power and what we're voting on at these other layers of the DAO? How do we continually do this? And like, one of the ideas I've been enamored with and talked about before is, like, most of the governance has started to become very top down. We're over relying on that root sort of governance layer, and it's trying to make decisions on everything, or it's haphazardly delegating authority to these messy, off-chain, things. And I would love to see over time the context erodes, whether it's a grants committee or whether it's the whole DAO voting on these things. Over time, there's so much activity going on at the guild project work stream working group layer of the DAO that nobody really has context. And so the people who actually have context are the people who are participating in those teams. And I'd like to start to see a bottom-up governance emerge, where if they can get more on-chain and more functional around like their structure and like who's doing what and what decision-making authorities reside in those smaller autonomous, they could actually start to run a representative governance model. So they can start to elect representatives who have high context of their particular project or guild and move that representative into a representative governance layer that can make decisions about multiple projects and guilds and bring the context of their specific domain. What this does is it starts to alleviate the burden that is being applied to these simplistic root DAO governance token voting things, whether it's an elected, grants committee, or DAO, liquid democracy delegated stewards. They just don't have the context to make all of these decisions. Plus, they're often not compensated appropriately to do so and to put good due diligence in. And so if we can go to this more bottom-up representative model, it doesn't mean that we take over the root DAO governance. We start to reduce what it's trying to be and do, and make it, sort of the final, kind of like an L1, analogy. It's the final, decision, final arbitration, but start to put more governance, on chain and secure, clear, transparent ways for the rest of what's going on in the DAO, and start to give it more power in decision making because it has context and because it maybe could start to produce a bottom-up representative model. And you kind of get, this multi-layer governance in DAOs. And I think this is now possible with all of the work that's been done around soul-bound or non-transferable NFTs and being able to play with effectively, giving power that has nothing to do with the root DAO governance token to people in particular domains, a delegated authority that is on-chain, clear, revocable, and can be changed along the way. And so I think there's something there that's coming, and I think it will make DAOs a lot easier to understand and a lot more functional, and we'll get a lot less of these attack by spreadsheets that we've been hearing about where, someone...
Oh my God, that was horrible.
Exactly. And we can't shame this, because as an operator in a DAO, I've been using spreadsheets and been a multi-sig signer, on stuff where, we're a centralized authority just trying to keep things operational, because, these people are volunteers who are doing the tough work to, when it's healthy, they're doing the tough work to just keep things going in the absence of a user-friendly on-chain system. And so, yeah, it's something else, right?
You made a really good point towards the end about we can't blame them, we can't shame them, right? Because we are them, right? We do all the same things, and when someone gets bitten by an attack, it's a lesson to all of us. So, I do personally appreciate all the mistakes that get caught and get shown, so that the rest of us don't make it, hopefully. And if we do, then others will learn. Are there any projects that jump out to you that are doing this right? The bottom-up governance, it's really working, it's really compensating the delegates well, there's very clear for all the token holders, that's transparent, obviously, and without abuse of power and that kind of stuff.
I don't think anyone has a working model that is nailing this that I am aware of. I see one of the reasons why I said I'm having a lot of fun in this bear cycle is I'm observing that there are protocols that are building into this, this opportunity, and there are DAOs that have kept it together, or emerging new DAOs that are looking at this, and they're willing to roll up shirt sleeves and do the work to start to play with these new protocols. And so protocols that I found, interesting, that are thinking about, say, on-chain structure of an organization are groups like Hat's Product Protocol and Otter Space with their non-transferable NFTs and the fact that they have a structure of relationships amongst them. which allows you to create an organizational structure of delegated authority that is composable and controllable using things like multi-sigs or governance smart contracts, and you get something pretty neat possible. And then I'd say that there's a number of early innovators that are playing with this and considering what to do. And I've seen in some of those communities groups like Super Rare, All In for Sport, a Kraus House related initiative. Rather Mercurial, I see on the call here, is someone who's doing these types of designs and contemplations, and thinking about how to use these new emerging protocols in conjunction with the ones we played with in this last cycle. And this is the stuff that gets me excited. But is anyone there yet? And the answer would be like, no, not at all.
Right, but the fact that they're on their way and then they're already trying things that are in the realm of it, I think is pretty exciting, especially, in the bear market, but the attention is away when it's not kind of boosted by all the hype and euphoria. It's cool to see all of this happening now, and then, in a couple of years, when the spotlight's really on, there might be something really cool to show for it, which makes me wonder. We were talking about this a couple of podcasts earlier, as far as motivation, right? So on the one hand, contributors, some can afford to just volunteer and get paid something nominal, and they have their income, or they have, their early crypto gains, or their, Bored Ape NFTs to live off of, whatever, right? But others have nothing or are next to it and really need to actually earn an income and would love to build, but need to feed their families, on the one hand, right? So there's the extrinsic motivation that's important. On the other hand, it feels, at least from my perspective, from everything I've seen, that most of the best projects, the most sustained projects, have some sort of idea, some sort of story, something that really drives them intrinsically, that makes them do this rather than something else, makes them persevere when an attack happens, when solution fails, when there's no one paying attention to them, when there's a billion other things that happen wrong in this industry, right? So what do you think about intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation? Is it one the other? Is it both? Are there interesting ways to combine the two? What kind of narrative do you see around that in the space right now? And personally, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I love it. And I think, the utmost of respect for the idea that in the topic of sustainability, it's not just DAOs. We ourselves as individual contributors, we need sustainability too. So extrinsic can't be ignored, either at the DAO level or individually, because the cost of sustainability is high. Now, that said, I think intrinsic leads extrinsic. And so I might have done a disservice earlier by talking about, PTS DAO and talking about Moloch, as a way out, and talking about the affordances of the contract itself, like rage quitting. The real way out was the meme of Moloch itself. The fact that the contract was called, Moloch, and that it was Moloch DAO, and the meme of Moloch, the god of coordination failure, as a story and a mission to go on to get over the counter story that was intrinsically creating fear, and to transmute that fear into something motivating and exciting. The Moloch meme and the Moloch story was key. Similarly, I mentioned Gitcoin, and Kevin Owocki and Gitcoin they were very clearly focused on stories and memes, and getting people excited about public goods, and public goods are good, and the story around why public goods have historically suffered, and why quadratic funding and the work of Glenn Whale and Vitalik on the quadratic model was a worthy experiment, and that story was incredible. And so the stories are what move us, and so we get intrinsically motivated first. I think that there's a relationship between the DeFi, movement
of 2020, and something external to our space, which was the GameStop movement, and an understanding of who Citadel and the market makers in the incumbent system are, and why, with the market makers being centralized, things are really sad when you look at them. And the GameStop movement was a fun story, driven by a Reddit forum that actually shined a light on a real issue of, these centralized market makers and how they manipulate things and take advantage of us via, the free trading platforms like Robinhood, selling their order books to them. And it's so funny to me that, that after this, we didn't just see a boom in meme stocks. We saw the crypto boom. I'm sure there were some macro factors that were at play on the back of COVID and in the macro markets that are often discussed. But I think that these stories and the participation in these stories, and I think that's the other important factor of this, is like intrinsic motivation comes from an incredible story that I get to be a character in. And so I think the way out in this next cycle is to lead with intrinsic motivation. And the superpower of DAOs is that it's the story that you get to participate in. Let's Buy a Constitution at its core is kind of a lame story or a lame raid or mission to go on. But the fact that we were able to deeply participate and have a ton of impact, impact that we could never have as individuals, that participation was what compelled us. The GameStop movement was kind of a dumb game mechanic and a relatively lame story, but it was like the deep participation of trying to topple the big bad hedge fund, whether that was, logical or not, was just so intrinsically motivating and so fun. And so I think if we're going to go out of this bear, we're going to have to lead with the intrinsic motivation of even better stories this time round and sustain this deep participation that is possible with DAOs and smart contracts.
So that's actually, obviously everyone knows about those examples, but let's talk about them a bit more, because they're so not just fun but so interesting as a case study of what people can do and what motivates them, right? So GameStop and the Wall Street Bets movement, they failed because, well, from my understanding, the other side, traditional finance side, was just too strong and were using tricks that were questionable legality, to say the least. And instead of having to, liquidate their own options, long options, they delayed settlement for a long time, and they outlasted them, right? With Constitution DAO, as far as I know, they mentioned that the amount that they were going to go up to, and then some billionaire heard about it and just outbid them, right? So there they lost too. But are those losses final? Are these movements done, or are they just regrouping and going to try some other way of challenging the system? Is this a story that's dead, or is this a story that's just taking a break to come back stronger? Because it really feels like a power of the people versus the kind of old institutions that are stuck in there, that are abusing the people, that are abusing the power, that need to go, but so far seem to be winning.
Yeah, like what's really fun, and that maybe some people know but not everyone, is that that's actually all the same story.
I did not know that. Cool.
So the person who won the Constitution bet used the transparency of what the DAO was going to vote to, as it was voting to as set as their limit. The person who won that was Ken Griffin, Griffin, I believe, of Citadel. So the market maker who was the enemy during the GameStop movement was the same person who bought the Constitution and outbid Constitution DAO. So the story is still unfolding. And so I think, you nailed it. They use sort of two techniques and two advantages that they press when the other side, the incumbent powers, the incumbent market makers, and all the current centralized powers and authorities have a tendency to use their coordination advantage. So and their informational asymmetry. So, in a closed, centralized system, we don't get to see what's going on. In our open, decentralized system, they were able to see what we were voting we were going to, bid at, and then just beat our bid. And so that there is some coordination advantages from the information asymmetry of a closed system, and there's some coordination advantages of a small centralized team, being able to move quickly and make decisions quickly in comparison to us. So we have to level up our coordination game if we want to play further in this game and have a better chance of winning, as we up the stakes and stop playing silly games, trying to knock down their tower of blocks and build our own skyscrapers and cities. And so I think the coordination memes that we have going on are the area of focus, because we have to figure out how to be as coordinated or, differently advantaged, and use our strengths to our advantage relative to the ones that they have as strengths. The other area, looking at the GameStop story and how it unfolded, was that through centralization, they kind of manipulated the game because they can do things in an off-chain world through politicking and through those kinds of centralized vectors that you can't do in an on-chain world. You can't, when you have an open, mutable, set of contracts governing things, then those are the rules. It's code is law kind of thing. And so where code isn't law, and it can't be law everywhere, but in the incumbent system, it's not basically anywhere, they shut down the ability for us to participate. They completely changed the shape of the playing field in the middle of that saga. And so in addition to, them having better information, and the Reddit side, having trouble keeping information clear, our social media platforms are attackable, and there is evidence and belief that there were bot style attacks in the forums where these groups were trying to coordinate when things got really heated, and there was a lot of misinformation, a lot of confusion, and there isn't a lot of specialized knowledge like there is on the other side, the centralized side. And in addition to that, they then went behind the scenes, and because the business model, this is the theory and what I've come to believe, but because the business model of Robinhood was that if the product is free and Robinhood's about free trades, then then you, the user, the end user of the Robinhood platform, are the product. And the product was that they sold their order books to Citadel, and you were effectively flying coach as far as your orders were concerned relative to the sort of premier orders, not to mention the fact that Citadel and their friends are likely, even though they're not supposed to, trading against you in that system. And so Robinhood's order book is like cannon fodder to these folks in terms of scalping the trades in the middle. And so they basically applied pressure to Robinhood, it looks like, to shut down the buy button and to stop their customers from being able to purchase GameStop stock and drive the short squeeze when it was probably still in its effective domain, and to give them time to recover. And that's not really playing fair. That's changing the rules of the game. I should be, able to make a purchase of the stock, but because we were moving through a platform where we were the product and getting free trades as, second-class trades in this system, then, when push came to shove and things were getting scary, they basically said timeout, ref, and we're able to call a timeout, even though the rules said they probably shouldn't have been able to do that. And so, yeah, I think this is what we're fighting against, is, making it so that the rules become clear. And that's what I'm saying DAOs need to do in this next chapter. All of the problems we were facing operationally in DAOs as they expanded and most of the, the operations was off-chain, we ended up with the same problem. We want the rules to be clear, and, we're going to probably program them wrong. We're going to get the wrong patterns along the way, and things are going to go wrong. But, as long as the rules are clear and they're reinforced and nobody can use a centralization vector or politics or favors to manipulate the rules, we're all playing what should theoretically be a much fairer game than the one that was exposed and always has been, that the GameStop movement shined a light on, in my opinion.
Yeah, just a little kind of follow-up question, even though it's a bit off topic, but do you think in a DeFi world, decentralized DeFi world at least, there's still a kind of manipulation just on a more decentralized scale in terms of, MEV attacks and optimization, as some call it, and all the front-running bots and all the other bots that are happening? Do you think that's just kind of replacing the old bad with the new bad, or is it just the kinks that are going to be ironed out and eventually it's going to be optimized and protected against to the point where it's not going to be much of a factor?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of replacing old bad with different bad. But I think that,
Exactly, yeah.
yeah, but I think one of the key advantages is the fact that MEV is a major conversation. Like we weren't talking about, how the incumbent system was manipulated by those who had found ways to centralize power relative to how trades find liquidity in the existing system. And we were supposed to trust the SEC to manage that. And so, we've all come to understand how effective and how political, they're supposed to be apolitical, but they're not. We've seen that firsthand through sort of this crypto revolution and the relationships we've, tried to establish and failed to establish with these types of things. And we've seen how ineffective they are going after what really matters versus this silly fluff shit that furthers their ambitions and careers. And so I think, what I appreciate about things like MEV, sandwich attacks, Ponzi-nomics, DeFi schemes, et cetera, the governance bribing, that's occurring, curve wars, et cetera. Like, I am not an expert in these areas because I'm a DAO guy, not a DeFi guy. But at the end of the day, I'm appreciating that it's transparent, these on-chain movements. They may be anonymous, and so we still sometimes are speculating, what's happening. But we're able to see what's happening, and we're able to have conversations about what can we do to improve it and make this a better system. And when you see things like flashbacks come on the scene as soon as the MEV conversation is happening, and they're effectively democratizing MEV, and then, it starts to become a little less scary. When we start to see charts and statistics around centralization of validator networks, et cetera, we're transparently getting a sense of the health of the system. How many validators are running the code that is censoring, with the OFAC censoring validator code. Like, again, we're seeing transparently what's happening, and we're asking ourselves, do we like this? What can we do about it? And I think that is what is so different about the current system, where the time periods where we get some level of transparency are often months. Months and months have gone by as the quarterly reports for certain things start to come out. And, the level of transparency that we get, you're kind of drowning in fluff paperwork, not getting nice, raw, on-chain, audible stuff. And you can't build careers in the same way that we've seen careers approach, happen inside this space. I think of like Zach XDT and the optimism, airdrop received there, and the level of support recently in the suit that Zach is facing. We've got people who have built a career around a sort of effectively a decentralized police force versus a centralized corruptible one like the SEC. I love that. I think that is very promising. Could it trend towards a new dystopia? Sure, but that's amazing that we have a chance to try something different, and it already has some great affordances in the transparency.
Yeah, theoretically, the new dystopia could be worse than the previous one, but at least we know the previous one pretty much failed, and let's see where this one leads. Maybe, hopefully, it's going to be a lot better. I just realized that we're an hour in, and I, being selfish and enjoying this conversation, completely forgot to mention that this is a discussion for everyone who's in. So anyone who wants to raise their hand, ask a question, participate in discussion, go ahead. This is not just me and Bryan talking to each other. I mean, we could do that off the air as well. But this, of course, for all of the DAO, not just for the DeXe DAO, but really for everyone listening in. So if anyone has a question, raise a hand. And anything we talked about or didn't talk about, anything DAO you want to ask, obviously ask away. We're going to talk a little bit more, and out of respect for Brian's time, I'm going to slowly start wrapping this up. But it's really interesting. There's a lot of interesting stuff, but just oh wait, never mind. There's a request. Okay, let's see who's up. Okay, Roman. Okay, let's put Roman on, and I'll mute myself for a bit. Roman, you're on.
Jam Roman, you're muted.
All right, let me see if I can get Roman unmuted. Should be able to do it himself. Let me check. Roman?
Hey guys.
Oh, hi, Roman. Go ahead.
Yeah, have some problems with connection. Sorry. Yeah, Brian. Hey, nice to meet you. And really, was surprised, and it was really interesting speech. So thank you. First of all, I have one question. It's like maybe what stories are the strong enough for sustaining DAOs? What stories can help the DAO get through all the barriers, obstacles, and work great for a long time?
Yeah, I love this question. I don't know, but I think I know some of the characteristics they will have. So I think the stories that will put us on the path again are stories that help people who didn't arrive in this last cycle understand the unique capabilities and power of these Web3 protocols and primitives that we've been building. And that's a very challenging story to tell. And so we need to be able to tell a story that is honest, simple, and highlight, themes like coordination, collaboration, equitable value distribution, and things that get us on this sort of path of what some in the industry like Jordan Hall and Daniel Schmachtenberger and others refer to kind of more at game B. And so less of this rivalrous, what can I get and what can I win kind of story and dynamic. We're going to win this auction. You're going to win this no loss lottery. Like, these were excellent stories to help actually hijack. And I think the Bankless crew did a good job of highlighting this. You came to get rich. And that's kind of honestly the story that was like motivating people to show up. And then you learned about Moloch. You learned about coordination. You made friends. You recognized that there was something bigger here. And I think, we need to get better at that second order story and presenting it up front and being able to get people intrinsically motivated by it and the level of change that is possible if they come together and work on these, non-rivalrous, approaches to creating value and sharing value. And I think that's an extremely hard story to tell. But if we figure that out, crack that code, so to speak, then we won't attract, some of the stuff that we selected for when we led with the story, come here, get rich, have fun staying poor. We're going to beat the other guys, using this rivalrous, game, and which side are you on? And the kind of tribalism, we were hacking ourselves using the old memes, and it was arriving people, and many great people arrived and stayed. But as we know, a lot of shit got damaged by the extractors that showed up, because that is a siren song for them too.
Yeah, I tend to agree with Brian. It's storytelling is so powerful, and there's a lot of resistance to it too, right? Just thinking about just today reading about FTX, and one of my very close crypto friends kind of wrote a rant about against FTX, basically against the system or so, in terms of in the lawsuit, retail investors whose money was, FTX really took, getting screwed in all of this. And I gotta wonder, the story of self-custody, of decentralized trading, of not trusting anything in remotely centralized, is a strong one, and it's one we've been telling ourselves since at least 2017, probably even before, and then still talking about. And yet, when FTS came around, I know I did, and obviously a lot of others just went to it. Like, yeah, they have real cool derivatives trading. They have a cool platform. Let's use it. Let's play with it, right? And so, in a way, the greed story, stories that old as the world, defeated the new, stay safe and responsible for yourself and empowered kind of story. And that makes me wonder, are the good story forces, so to speak, the light side of the force, stronger than the dark side of those forces, the greed, the impatience, the competitiveness, the kind of old thinking of, strike it while it's hot and grab as much money as you can. Are the good stories going to win? How can we make them win? Is it really the projects and then the crypto space and the stories themselves, or is it ourselves that we need to work on first? I know I'm getting a little philosophical, so maybe this is a good thing to wrap up on. But Brian, your thoughts on kind of that whole thing? I know I've gotten a little bit off the deep end, but
No, it's the deep end that I'm swimming in right now, and I'm during this bear cycle. One of my hobbies has been like revisiting, an area that I haven't studied in my career, which is, but I've seen inklings of, trying to understand, say, Joseph Campbell and the hero's journey, and understanding story architecture and understanding how games are produced, and how a great game unfolds. And I've also been trying to understand, developmental theory, and how we, how our own thoughts evolve as we're on our own journey. And honestly, I think these are good places. The deep end is where we should be swimming right now, because there is existing wisdom that can be tapped into. Stories are old as time, and I think we need to learn how to tell stories about the very thing that we want to make possible. And I think it's possible to get people excited about that without having to psyop them. Because I'd argue that it's a bit of a psyop to, invite people to get rich, or tell that meme and that story, and then be like, now that you're here, it's all about coordination and collaboration. That's ripe for issues. It's just we can't manipulate. We just got to get better at this.
I mean, the last point is pretty much 100% true. And I know I came into crypto because it looked like a cool way to get rich, and then of course stay for the actual revolution that hopefully we're gonna succeed in. But regardless, the process is amazing, and maybe there's nothing wrong with it. With that little bit of psyops, it works, right? But on the bigger point, that hero's journey, the game mechanics of it, that is something that really needs more exploring. I know we got to wrap up now, but if you're up for it, I'd be very excited to bring you back to talk about that some other time. I think that alone is a whole topic, another topic that we can easily spend an hour on, and wherever that leads.
Yeah, I'd be happy to come back, and I'm not an expert in those areas, and I'm trying to learn, and but I'd be happy to talk about them in more maybe even a panel from somebody who is artful in the craft. We can collectively learn from them. That would be amazing.
Yeah, panel actually sounds great. Let's try to put something like that together. Okay, we really got to wrap up, but kind of the last thing. Tell us what you're most excited about right now. Of what you're working on, what you're seeing, something that really gets you super excited. Leave us on a positive note. Maybe some stories that are really getting excited, and we'll wrap up around there.
Yeah, I mean, at Team Sobol, we've been recently we launched Sobol Labs. We think that the bear is the time to experiment and do different things. And we, if the future is smart contracts that can be composed, and we end up running our organizations with code, well then, we need to make it more accessible for folks to be able to code. And so, at Sobol, we're one of many who have started to tap into this this energy of making it easier to compose smart contract code to create an organization that runs on that code. And so we've created a visual code composer, partnered up with HAT protocol recently, and have been doing some experiments where you can make it easier to start playing with these things and wiring them up together. And so I think that's a pretty darn exciting thing, especially because it brings us into the space of collaborating with the different smart contracts and protocols that can be composed together in that way. And so we've had a lot of fun making new friends and starting to try and figure out, well, what is the user experience that's required to turn all of us into DAO composers? And like I said, I think we're one of many that have started to tap into this, and I'm excited to see all of those experiments and make it easier to DAO it.
Yeah, we all got to DAO it. And like you said, collaboration, composability, storytelling, of course, play, are kind of the themes that I think have been driving this for a while. So really excited to link up with you again for another discussion, maybe a panel one if we can do it. And thank you, huge thanks. I'm looking at the listeners here, and all these hearts are popping up, all the positive emotions. So we definitely did this for a good cause, and hopefully people learn something, have something to think about. We'll continue discussion among themselves. I'm hoping this creates a bit of a spark and leads to more great storytelling.
So, thank you, DeXe DAO. I really appreciate the chance to be here.
Thanks, Bryan. Talk to you later. And everyone else, thank you for tuning in. Until next time, and end this right now. And